What is it about sound that I resonate with? I can't imagine the world without it. I walk into their sound studio, and for the first time, I felt at home. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Everything is music. Leaves blowing in the wind is music. Do I remember the moment when it all clicked? I went into the theater, and I couldn't believe I had done that. This is for keeps. I'm just doing what I do. The way my stuff got to develop like that was by working with someone as amazing as Hans. I've sort of integrated the DPA 4041 into my regular orchestral workflow, and it's really changed everything for me. You know, it's funny, I like to say that I didn't actually choose this career chose me. Hi, I'm Alan Meyerson. What is it about sound that resonates with me? I think that's been something that I've really been precious about my whole life. I remember when I was very young, listening to my parents' music, big band, stuff like that, listening to cars go by, listening to just, the sound of the world and noticing it. And my first time when I was in junior high school, I got onto the audio-visual squad because I wanted to play with sound. I even wanted to play with microphones. I never thought about it in any sort of longevity or it's, that's why I like the question, because I didn't really think of it like that. So I seem to have a good ear for sound, and because of that, I had a pretty good ear for music. And because of that, gratefully, the New York public school system sticks an instrument in your hand if you're musical in any way. And they stuck a trumpet in my hand, and I ended up, just falling in love with orchestral music. So sound, I can close my eyes and listen to a recording or a concert or be outside and be taken somewhere. And I'm very aware of that. And so the fact that this is what I do for a living sort of just means I never really have to work, because I just love sound. And that's scary when you get a little older, because, I don't know how long I'm going to have sound as an option. It's certainly different now than it was 25 years ago. What is the journey I go on when I hear sounds? There's a couple. There's this game that I've been playing with myself since I've been a very young recording engineer, whereas if I close my eyes, what's the farthest sound I can hear? Like I start listening for, the leaves blowing. Oh, but then there's a bird over there. Yeah, but if I really listen, I can hear the train going by. Oh, but I hear drunk guys, and I always had a lot of fun with that. As a matter of fact, I teach that. But the other side of that is just a purely visceral, emotional connection to sound. If I close my eyes, and even if I don't, it's the sound that really draws me in. I think I'm much more of an oral person than a visual person, and I'm still a visual person. But it doesn't have to be music, although it is music. Everything is music, actually. If you want to know the truth, everything is music. Leaves blowing in the wind is music. Birds. We have incredible birds outside of my house, and we get mockingbirds at night that are literally making love out there. And just to listen to that sound, it just relaxes me. It takes some of the edge off of my anxiety sound. Even not super loud sound, but just stuff that I can connect to. I don't love super loud sound anymore. As young, growing up in the 70s, obviously, I went to one too many Grateful Dead concerts, and I've listened to a lot of loud sound, but, at this age, I enjoy full sound. When I mix, I still mix relatively loud, and then I spend a lot of time mixing actually quietly. So those differences really help me understand what I'm listening to. But just to go back to your question of what is it about sound that I resonate with, I can't imagine the world without it. It's funny, I like to say that I didn't actually choose this career chose me, because this is not Plan A. Plan A was playing in a symphony orchestra on my trumpet, New York Philharmonic, whatever that fantasy was. And I was just, terribly unqualified for that, basically because I didn't have the talent or the work ethic. And I landed in a recording studio, literally walking through the hallways of my college, Brooklyn College, not knowing what I was going to do because I had this dream for so long. And I had this one day where I realized that dream wasn't going to happen. And I'm walking around and I hear music. So I just, as I said, with sound, I just walk to the music and I walk into their sound studio. And I got an internship, and through there I met this guy who gave me, told me that they were opening up this recording studio in Manhattan doing commercials. And I went down there and I interviewed and I got the job, and one thing led to another. And then I was, really in the record business, at first in the jingle business. And then I sort of went into the record business without me saying I want to go into the record business. I worked with some jingle producers that ended up also having a career doing records. And through them, I met a producer. So I did that, and I did that for a while, and I was relatively successful, but it didn't hit my heart. Pop music, I love pop music, but it didn't hit my heart. It felt like work. And a lot of 24-hour days, a lot of nights I was not enjoying listening to music super loud, listening to sounds I didn't like and stuff like that. And then when I got into this world, into the world of film music and orchestral recording, I just literally felt like the universe had created this Allen-sized slot in this industry, and I just went in there and filled it. And for the first time, I felt at home. So the first time I ever worked on a film, I lied. I remember the film, and the composer who I'd already mixed for said, "You know how to record an orchestra, right? And I'm like, "Of course." I'd never recorded an orchestra before in my life. I had recorded string sections and brass sections doing commercials, but I never sat and recorded an 80-piece orchestra in my life. But I learned that it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So I always figured say yes and figure it out afterwards. So that's what got me into it. But what I found was that because of my, life being a second trumpet player in an orchestra, being in the middle of a chord, being in the middle of an orchestra, being part of a larger sound, that when I sat behind the console and listened, I had a unique perspective about it. Now, I don't think that's unique to me. I think that a lot of really, really good scoring mixers are orchestral musicians. Sean Murphy was a trombone player, or tuba player, and so on and so forth. But I also, because of my growing up, I read music before I could read. So sitting there with a score in front of me was, it was easier for me to do that than sit there and read a book. So that became something that was very useful to my clients and also really made me feel at home. I just felt so at home being in that environment. And then because of my world of the record mixing and everything, the mixing side of it, where I was combining this skill level I had with orchestral music because I was a musician, and those years I spent mixing dance records and R&B records and, European alternative music and stuff like that, that combination of those two things gave me a unique perspective. And that sort of helped me get my career a little bit more, uniquely identifiable. Do I remember the moment when it all clicked? Well, I had two moments where it all clicked, I think. The first moment was when I was mixing the movie Speed, which was really my first mix on my own. And I realized that I didn't have a lead vocal track waiting for me to push up that someone was going to complain about. And that it felt very organic for me to mix music against a picture. So that really felt great. That really felt special. And then the next moment was maybe a year later, and I went to the Cinerama Dome to see the movie Crimson Tide, which I had mixed. And I went into the theater and I heard it in that theater with that sound system, and it was almost empty because I went in the afternoon, and I couldn't believe I had done that. And that's when it really dawned on me that this is for keeps. This is what I want to do. And I think I'm uniquely lucky that way, that I sort of found the thing that I love and figured out a way to make a living at it. Can I think of a project that shifted my perspective on sound design? There's been quite a few, but the one I will think about the most is Interstellar. Because first of all, the score and the sound design were, in all Chris Nolan movies, they're really one thing. Hans' score and Richard King's sound design sort of cross over in magical ways. But the thing that really impressed me about what Richard King did in Interstellar was how he used organic sounds to create this huge soundscape, whereas so much of what we do now is so computer generated and all that. And if you watch that movie, that is an analog movie. And he told me stories about how he created some of the sounds and stuff, and I was really amazed by it. I just was amazed, and it's just so cool. So that film made a big difference for me. But Hannibal also was a film where I remember going to see the first reel and hearing how well balanced Paul Massey had made the music and the sound design, and how well the dialogue fit together, and how all of it felt like it was sort of like, almost like a choreography. It was brilliant. The third one I want to mention is my one opportunity to be a full-time dubbing mixer, a re-recording mixer on the film The Preacher's Wife. I recorded the score and I ended up mixing the songs. And Penny Marshall and I got along really well, and she had asked them to ask me if I wanted to actually be the dubbing mixer for the music, because that was still when there were 3 mixers: music, dialogue, and effects. And I did it, and I really didn't understand I didn't understand it that well. And by the time I had left that project, thanks to who's probably one of my best friends in the business now, Ron Bartlett, brilliant dubbing. I did all the Dunes with him and so many movies, I don't even know where to start. And Chris Jenkins, who was the head mixer, the dialogue mixer. And I got to see the inside of the sound design in a way that I didn't get before, because usually I would go to the dub and I would show up for a little bit and I'd leave and go back and mix music. But this time I was there, and I could see what he was doing, and all of the Foley and all of the way that the people at the top level like that created the environment, that it was seamless. It was seamless. And that, like I said, every sound to me, just sound, is such a big part of my life, that to see how that process works at that level really opened up my eyes. And I really feel like that was the project where I became a member of the film community, as opposed to just a recording engineer, mixer who's mixing a film score. So how do I approach mixing? Do I approach it from a scientific side or an artistic side? So this is my opinion about what I do is as a craft. I don't look at myself as an artist. I don't look at myself as an engineer. I have the craft of mixing or recording. So depending on the music and depending on the project, I'm either going to come at it from, the logical side into the creative side, or vice versa. It really comes down to the project. How do I know when the mix is finished? I never know. They just yank it out of my, cold dead hands at some point, It's very hard to feel it's finished, because I know I'm going to come back the next day and hear things. So there's a certain point where you just have to move on, especially when you're doing film music and you have to mix 75 pieces of music in 10 days. You can't get that precious with it. So I just try not to stay precious with things. And I hit a spot where I go, it's pretty good. And then I listen for one last tweak, and that's it. I love DPA mics, and working backwards, in the last year or so, I've sort of integrated the DPA 4041 into my regular orchestral workflow as my entire immersive sort of capturing of the room. And it's really changed everything for me. It's sort of changed my approach about how to record an orchestra. So for me, and I've tried it with other mics, and the 4041 specifically is the one that does it, and it's perfect, But I've been using DPA mics as long as DPA's been making mics. I have probably 10 or 11 DPA mics in my road case for the last 20 years. And, they're always there when I need them. There are certain things that they're just better than anything on. And, the clarity of them, the dynamic range, the noise floor, all that stuff. And they're, just an imperative mic in my setup. I can always find a place for them. What I do is I have a world that is just the DPAs that is interspersed or actually overlaid against my traditional Decatree spot world. And I find that the balance between the two of them gives me an incredible amount of choices in terms of the emotional impact of the orchestra or the detail of the orchestra. It's a tool that I never had before. So I don't know if that's unconventional or not, but it certainly gives me a whole new perspective. Other than that, I'm not really an unconventional mic person. I have done many, many things, tried it pretty much every trick there is, and I've sort of gotten it down to what I know works. And so I just sort of stick with what I know. And every now and then I'll throw a crazy idea in there and see how it goes. One of the great things about film scoring tools and technology is even as the technology increases and things become easier on certain aspects, the thing that is just never going to change from now until they stop making movies is a microphone in front of a person. You cannot, the two things we can't get rid of are the transducers, the microphone, the speaker. Everything else we could find another way to do it. Back in the day, I used to have a lot of outboard gear and stuff, and now I'm often in the box. As a matter of fact, I'm almost always in the box, although right now I'm expanding out of the box a little bit. And the technology is amazing, and what the technology does is it makes the logistics of my job much easier. It enables me to print more tracks than I could without a tenth of the work and all that. But until I get to that place, it's still very much like it used to be. The only difference is as time goes on, we tend to record sections separately and, to have control. But recently for me, actually, the truth of that is I've been recording more stuff together than not together. So to sum it up, mixing technology is really making a huge difference. Recording, it's still a microphone in front of a person. My suggestion to a young engineer coming up with technology is sort of keep an eye on what's out there and, look forward. Try to, if you don't understand something, try to learn what it is. And which is great for me because I don't want to do that. So when, that's my assistant's job is, so I look at it like this world. I feel like I'm just about out of drive space in my head. So I have to offload stuff to other drives. So I offload into my assistant's head. So things like denoising and pitch adjusting and melodyne, I don't do that. I have someone that can do that because I need to focus on what I want to focus on. But I love when I see new technology out there, new ways to do things, and I can integrate it in. For me, it's a slow process, but I also love when people, really dive deep and find stuff, that really, I love it. But for someone coming into the business now, it's a big business. I say just, your job, your homework is really finding out what's out there and then applying it to what you like. I love all these educational programs, but I can tell you that every single assistant I've had that has come from Berkeley or Crass or whatever it was has said to me that they learned more in the first week than they learned in their entire 4-year time in school because there's nothing like practical knowledge, and seeing it happen and being in it and feeling it, And it's hard now because it is shifting, because there aren't as many studios as there used to be, and the job of assistant engineer isn't what it used to be, because now, honestly, the job of, unless you're in a recording studio and not in a mixing studio, the job of an assistant is session setup almost entirely. And that's just not the same thing. So I try to move them out fast and get them into the studio. I've had a lot of success. I've had assistants from Sylvia Massey, who is Sylvia Massey, I don't even need to tell you. Neil Pogue, who is the most prolific hip hop mixer on the planet, and In my film world, I have Eva Reistat, who's just doing incredibly well. And, so I've done the mentorship thing quite a bit. And also for me, I look at the ones who mentored me as superheroes. I talk about Gary Chester all the time. The first guy I worked with, he had no idea what he was doing for me, and I didn't learn just how to put a mic in a bass drum. I learned how to get a sound quick. I learned how to get a sound fast and not linger, how to take care of a client, how to make it feel like it's a safe place in a room, how to do a good headphone mix so that the musicians were inspired to play, stuff like that. That's what I learned from him, So it's all about mentorship for me. The experience that I had of growing up at the Hit Factory as an assistant and going from that to being an engineer and then going back to being an assistant at A&R Studios and then becoming an engineer and then becoming a freelance, that's very rare nowadays. It just doesn't, the industry itself is not built like that anymore. So now a lot of it's social media. I believe that if you're young and you want to get into this, collaboration is massively important. Find other people who speak the same musical language you do and, be friends with them and maybe create some music together. Or, if there's someone you really like, chase them down a little bit on the internet. See if you can, I talk to young people all the time. I email with them and text them. I have a call tomorrow with a guy who saw me at the last trade show. So, yeah. And I believe in it. And if I end my career and they say he was a great mentor, I'd feel pretty good about that. I don't know that I developed a distinct sound, but I know that, thanks to Hans Zimmer and my work with him, there was something that he was going for that I seemed to have a direct line or, some sort of, artistic line to helping him get. And because of that, because we were going for a more aggressive sound, sort of more processed sound and something that crosses occasionally into sound design, it sort of opened up a world for what I like to do very much. And because of that, I just, I do what I do and it comes out the way it comes out. And then people say, that's great, but I don't really think about it. I'm not going, oh, what can I do that makes me special or anything like that. I'm just doing what I do, so I would say that the short answer is the way my stuff got to develop like that was by working with someone as amazing as Hans. Every mistake I will tell you I have done. And that's because I've done pretty much every mistake there is to do. And there's too many answers to give you one, but I'll tell you one that applies to this particular conversation is sometimes I get recordings back that have more microphones than they have people. And it just drives me crazy because if you put up this mic and this mic, you can hear the combing between the two. You can hear the frequency shifting between the two. And, what I've learned through the course of time is that it's not that I don't use a lot of mics. I do use a lot of mics, but I'm very, very specific about where they go and having each of them have its own sound field to itself. So I feel like the biggest mistake is people thinking that they need 36 mics on a drum kit or a mic on every violinist in an orchestra, so on. Or, sometimes I see pictures of people miking a piano and there's 15 mics. What are you going to do with 15 mics? I mean, make a decision. It can only be one thing. So I say multi-miking like that to that level is a mistake. And then also, if you translate that into mixing, people trying, I'll tell you a story and it'll tell you exactly what my answer is. I was working on this project that I did in Vienna and I was doing really, really well with it. And there was this one song where we had the singer in the middle of the room with no screens around her singing with the orchestra. And for some reason I couldn't get something I liked and I worked on it and I worked on it and I worked on it. And I created these incredible reverbs and these beautiful delays and everything was just magic and flying around. And I, as I always do, I print it, I put it away, I email it to myself and I listen in my car. And the next day I listened, I said, oh my God, it sounds like someone trying to do an Alan Meyerson mix, except not knowing when to stop. So know when to stop, and, have someone you trust who can listen with you. They don't even have to give you their opinion. You could watch them listen and you'll learn a lot about your mix. I've been given a lot of amazing advice. Absolutely. Just, randomly, I remember one time we were working on a session and it was a lot of work, and we were at the end of the session, and I'm like, we got to finish. I'm like, we got to finish. And Hans turns to me and goes, why do you care? It's not your job to care. And I thought, like, holy crap, he's right. I'm not the one that has to worry about that. I never said it again. And I'll tell you a piece of advice. Okay, this is a really, really amazing piece of advice I got I was Herb Alpert's engineer for many, many years. We're still very good friends. And he's done so much for me. But one time I said something and he looked at me, he goes, there's got to be a nicer way to say that. And every time I want to say something now, that little voice in my head goes, is there a nicer way to say what I'm about to say? So I didn't mention Herb, by the way. Herb is, in ways even Hans isn't. Herb is, he's in so many ways my musical father. He's 92. He's still touring. He still plays, and he gave me so many microphones, but more than that, he gave me so much advice and just treated me like a friend from the first. He gave me the shirt off his back one day. Literally, we were in a session, and he was wearing this really beautiful Armani shirt. I said, "That's a beautiful shirt." He goes, "You like it?" "Yeah." He takes it off and gives it to me. He says, "Here," and then puts on a T-shirt. If I'm not feeling right about things, or I'm really sort of struggling, he's still my first call after all these years. Although now I'm trying to leave him alone a little bit because, he's an old geezer. Yeah, these old studios are very, very important. Again, I'll take you back. After Herb had sold A&M Records to Henson Studios, Brian Henson, they were going to close the studios, and they asked a couple of engineers to go down there and walk them through it, and I wasn't one that had worked there a lot, but I just, I said to him, you're never going to find this built again. Even if they build the studio, you take away the history and all of the ghosts that are in the walls. And, the people that come to studios like this are people that want to take in a little bit of that zeitgeist. So they might come to a Sinatra room not because of it's a great studio, which it is, okay, but because all of the incredible creative stuff, and even before they get there, it's spewing their creativity in a different way. So I think that these studios, they're really churches, they're really cathedrals and temples to this creativity, this world that we do, that the same way. It's not really the same as a museum, because a museum is where people go to see things that aren't being done anymore. This is sort of a living museum. And they happen to sound great. And it's very hard to build something nowadays with the sort of way that they built these rooms, with the thickness of the walls, with the floating floors and stuff. It's just not cost effective, so people don't tend to do that. So these older studios are, Capitol, this, and then the scoring stage is Sony, which is MGM, which is 90 years old, and Warner Brothers, which is 100 years old, and Fox, which is 60 years old or 70 years old. And, I walk into a room, and it's the room where they recorded Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz, and there's pictures on the wall of that. I mean, you can't not feel it. You can't not feel it. It's right there. There's this great picture at Warner Brothers of a setup that they did with the room in like the 50s or the 40s. And one of these days I'm going to have the right project, and I'm going to set up the room just like that, because it's so completely different than what we do today, and see what happens. Yeah, I think a lot of what's going to be next for me is going to be more of the same. My passion is recording, even more than mixing. So I'm going to, until they bury me in the ground, I'm going to be in a studio with super talented people trying to make the best recordings I can. I feel like I've been doing it now for 45 years and I've almost gotten it right. And I feel like if I do it another 45 years, I might find it. So that's the future. And, the future for me is also going to be teaching. I think there's a point where my ears are going to tell me it's time to stop and to teach. And I've already started teaching. I've been, doing seminars for 10, 12 years now, and I really love that. And working with young composers, recently I've worked with some amazing young composers. And I find that now at this point in my career where I'm what they call the silverback gorilla, it enables me to sort of come in with a perspective and they want to hear it, So I find that very, very satisfying. Other than that, to just enjoy my life, And one of the things about this business is it's so easy to get lost in the business and not really, smell the roses. So maybe what I'm going to do a little bit more is, plant some more roses.